What are we discussing on today's Locked On Diamondbacks podcast? Are the Dbacks and Paul Goldschmidt headed for a reunion? And who are the biggest needle movers hitting this year's free agency?
You are Locked On Diamondbacks, your daily Arizona Diamondbacks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into the Locked On Diamondbacks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. You're listening to who? The always charismatic host of this podcast, Millard Thomas, multimedia journalist and graphic designer. So please go check out my website, millardthomas24.myportfolio.com. I'm there to see all my latest work, from my packages to my articles to my photos and my graphic design. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. On today's Locked On Diamondbacks podcast, we're going to be discussing, are the Dbacks headed to a reunion with Paul Goldschmidt? Who are the MLB players who are the biggest needle movers this free agency? And then, of course, wrapping up the podcast with a player review. Today, we're discussing Ryne Nelson. Thank you for making Locked On Diamondbacks your first listen every day. I would not be able to do this podcast without you, my loyal listeners, sharing, subscribing, reviewing, doing all that so I could do this podcast for you. Thank you. It's free. It's available on all platforms, so please continue to tell your friends. And one of those platforms is YouTube. Please hit subscribe to Locked On Diamondbacks on YouTube. All right. Let's get back into the Locked On Diamondbacks podcast. And now let's discuss a report and a rumor that I've been seeing floating around Dbacks universe for this offseason, because as we know, the Dbacks first baseman, Christian Walker, going to be a free agent this offseason. He's going to command a lot of money. He's going to be very sought after. 30 home run guy, 100 plus ribbies, best defense in the National League, leader in the clubhouse, like no nonsense guy. You never hear anything bad talked about Christian Walker, high character dude. Like, he just tight-lipped, goes out there, plays hard every day, and literally 100% on the field every single game. And so Christian Walker is going to be a guy that is very sought after this free agency period, and maybe to the point where he gets priced out of the Dbacks range. And there is now rumors swirling that if Christian Walker gets too expensive, maybe they take a look at former friend of the Dbacks, Paul Goldschmidt, and they potentially want a little reunion with Goldie, which is kind of funny because the D-backs traded Paul Goldschmidt to go with the younger option in Christian Walker. Now Christian Walker might be too expensive, and so it's back to the younger option in Paul Goldschmidt. Now, the thing with Goldie is he is definitely in the twilight of his career. Just turned 37 years of age in September, and we know about his historically slow starts in the first half, right? Well, now the second half's the pickup in the second half is starting to come later and later. And you look at his numbers from last year: 22 home runs in 154 games, 245 average, 716 OPS. And it's like Goldie, the strikeout rate is starting to go upward. The walk rate starting to go downward. He still crushes the ball. You still look at the hard exit velocity, or you still look at the hard contact stats with Paul Goldschmidt with the exit velocity, hard hit percentage. Like, the ball is still flying off the bat of Paul Goldschmidt, but he has a tougher time recognizing the kind of pitches he wants to hit. He strikes out more. He chases a few more pitches. Like, it's not the same level of play discipline that we used to see with Paul Goldschmidt. And also, it's not just that the offense is a drop off to where he used to be, the defense is a drop off from where he used to be. And also, considering Christian Walker is by far the best defensive first baseman in the game. It's not close. Literally go on Fangraphs, filter it by first baseman, and then go on every stat you want. Christian Walker is going to be 1 or 2 in every category. And if he's number 1 in the category, I promise you he's the gap between him and number 2 is probably the same as the gap between number 2 and number 10 in that specific stat. And so you're losing a lot defensively going from Walker to Goldie. And then offensively, I mean, with Goldie in decline, I mean, he's not the level offensively that Christian Walker is either. Now, if you're telling me Christian Walker is going to be $25 million a year, Goldschmidt's going to go for $5 million a year, in a vacuum, the value of those two players, I guess, is not horrendous in a vacuum if you're comparing 25 to 5 million, but Walker just so much better of a player right now than Paul Goldschmidt. And I think it would be honestly a bad look on the organization to let a guy like Christian Walker walk in free agency when you're trying to build something that's sustainable. We're trying to get back to the postseason, get back to the World Series. To let Christian Walker leave in free agency over some money for a guy who used to be in your building, who you also let go, the former face of your franchise who you traded away because you were too cheap to pay him already. I think it's a bad message to bring him back to get rid of the better first baseman because now he's too expensive. I would much rather just pay Christian Walker. And like I always say, it depends on the length of the deal. I don't want to give Christian Walker a 6-year deal that's around 25 million a year. But listen, I'll give him 3 years at around 30 million a year because I'm always okay overpaying on short-term deals. I think teams get in trouble when they try to overpay on long-term contracts. And so for Christian Walker, I'm okay if it's a short-term overpay. And if he decides to leave, if he gets too expensive, I guess Paul Goldschmidt would be fine as a backup option. I mean, the other options for first base right now, I mean, Pete Alonso, but he's probably too expensive. Anthony Rizzo has a club option for 17 million. I expect the Yankees, I guess, to pick that up. Josh Bell, he's going to be out there. Is Josh Bell better than Paul Goldschmidt? Not sure about that. Carlos Santana, like he's been fine. Joey Gallo, like the first base market is pretty weak right now. And there was actually a fun rumor or maybe a speculation thrown out by Zachary Reimer Bleach Report saying maybe if the D-backs see Christian Walker leave this offseason, maybe there's a first baseman who's on a team under contract that they should trade for from the Detroit Tigers. And I think this one's kind of a fun name, Spencer Torkelson. Now, I think it's only fun because he is an ASU guy, first pick of the draft. So coming back to Tempe, coming back to Arizona, coming back to his roots would be a lot of fun. But he is a guy who has struggled mightily. I mean, 10 home runs this past season, 92 games. Did have 31 the year before, but has just been a strikeout machine. A consistent power hasn't been there. I mean, just the ability of contact hasn't really been there. And so for the D-backs, it would be a little bit of a reclamation, hoping putting him back in like his home environment can really help blossom Spencer Torkelson because he has struggled to begin his year. But if you're asking me if the D-backs strike down Christian Walker, should they go the Paul Goldschmidt route or the Spencer Torkelson route? At that point, I think it's a wash. Spencer, younger option, which I do like. Contract is pretty cheap as well because he's still going through arbitration for the next couple of years, being that young riser through the farm system. And so he's not going to be very expensive. Paul Goldschmidt probably won't be very expensive either at 37 years old. And at this point, they're probably both at the same level. I mean, obviously, Spencer being younger, you would hope he's still ascending while Goldschmidt's obviously in the decline. But at this point, if you ask me today, who's the better first baseman to go out there and play a game today, October 29th, it's probably a wash in my head. And so I don't care who the D-backs get between either of those options. If they strike out Christian Walker, I just know strike out Christian Walker is def con 1 for the D-backs. Now I want to discuss if the D-backs want to get crazy and spend some money this offseason, who are the biggest needle movers this free agency? We'll discuss in segment number 2. And if you want to buy tickets to an upcoming game, sporting event, concert, it doesn't matter. The best place to do that, of course, is going to be Game Time. I just used my tickets to get Lakers versus Suns this past week, and Game Time came through with one of those flash deals. A flash deal, it's an exclusive in-app deal, which lets you select seats ahead of the game or event, and you just get to save so much money with that exclusive in-app deal. They also have zone deals as well, which will let you choose a section, and then you let Game Time choose the seats. They even have this feature called all-in pricing. You toggle this feature on, and it shows you your total cost upfront with no surprise fees at checkout. Take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets and more with Game Time Picks. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account or redeem code locked on MLB for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. All right. Let's get back into the Locked on Diamondbacks podcast and let's discuss if the D-backs wanted to spend big this offseason, open up those purses and get a real needle mover who is out there this offseason. Because looking at this year's World Series, it's not a doubt that the biggest markets are out there and they spent some of the biggest money we've seen. And the stars that they went out there and got are playing like stars. The Otanis, which was signed for 700 million free agency, the Freddies, which was signed for a lot of money, the Mookies, which was traded and signed for. Those stars are stepping up in a big way. Trading for Jack Flaherty has been huge. Signing Yamamoto has been huge. You look at the Yankees. Garrett Cole, for the most part, has been great. Juan Soto, Giancarlo Stanton. I think this World Series is truly about going out there and acquiring the best players on the market, getting true needle movers. I think that's what we've seen more than anything from this World Series. It's a World Series of superstars, not just average players, but superstars like Freddie Freeman, who are going out there and hitting a home run every single game. So I want to discuss who are the superstars out there this free agency that could be a major needle mover for the D-backs. And these are guys who I think are superstars, at least within the context of what they could do with Arizona. There might be other players who you might deem a superstar who I just don't think moves the needle as much for the D-backs as they might for another team. And so let's get into the list because there's only a handful of these guys. There's some great players out there this free agency who I don't think are superstars in the context of helping out the D-backs. Like a Pete Alonso. Some people might consider him a superstar. I wouldn't. I think he's a great player, but it's like I would probably not probably. I would much rather sign Christian Walker, who's probably going to come in at a lower price tag than Pete Alonso, who I think is better than Pete Alonso. That's why it's hard for me to call him a superstar. Willie Adames, I think, is a really, really good player, but D-backs already have a all-star shortstop in Geraldo Perdomo and a future potential all-star in Jordan Lawler. I don't think they need to go out there and get Willie Adames. A guy like Teoscar Hernandez, yes, he would be a fantastic DH. Just came off an all-star appearance, but it's like I could pay Teoscar Hernandez, $20+ million, or I could just re-sign Grichuk and Jock Peterson for like the same price maybe and have two players instead of one. So it's like, yes, a lot of those players are really good. Some of those are all-star to star to superstar level players, but within the context of the D-backs, they only help so much. And so these are the guys who I think could be superstars for the Arizona Diamondbacks. And a couple of these guys are superstars no matter what their situation is. First guy is the guy we're seeing right now in the World Series, Juan Soto. Very easy guy to talk about. I mean, this guy is an absolute stud. Do I think the chances of the D-backs signing him are high? No, probably 1%, if even that, because the Yankees are definitely going to back up the Brinks trucks for Juan Soto. Soto is probably going to get $500 million to whatever the Aaron Judge contract was. I mean, he's a lefty power bat that just had a monster season in that little league ballpark of Yankee Stadium. 40 home runs, 100 plus ribbies, almost 1,000 OPS. Like, Juan Soto is one of the best players of baseball. We know this. And if the D-backs were somehow able to acquire him, that would definitely change life. I know the D-backs have Jake McCarthy and Corbin Carroll and Lourdes Gurriel and so many pieces, but all I know is if you had a Corbin Carroll and Juan Soto as the two corner outfielders for the next decade, your team is going to be in the mix every single season for having the best offense in the National League, at least a top 3 offense, right? So Juan Soto, I think, would be a major needle mover for the D-backs, but I think there's virtually no way to get Juan Soto, who is 26 years old, playing for the New York Yankees in a World Series. They are doing everything in their power to re-sign him. The next guy I think is a little bit more attainable. I just think, again, he's a superstar that will have a lot of options. But Corbin Burnes is a true superstar who is sneaky younger than what I realized. Only 30 years old for Corbin Burnes. again, fantastic. You look at the last few years for Corbin Burnes, you can make the argument he's been the best pitcher in baseball since like 2020. Like, that's how nasty he's been. He had a great postseason start with the Baltimore Orioles, had a great season with the Orioles, and going to be a free agent. He's going to cost a lot of money. And like I say, with pitchers who are 30 on the free agent market, don't want to do a long-term deal. But the D-backs can bring in a Corbin Burnes to go with Gallen, Kelly, and a Pfaadt as your top four. Like, yes, Burnes is your one, Gallen's your two, Kelly is your three. Is a nasty 1, 2, 3 with Pfaadt as your four would be the best 1 through 4 in Major League Baseball. I just don't know how the D-backs are going to afford him, because he's going to get probably 30 to 35 million a year, and a big market team, if not the Baltimore Orioles, a smaller market team, are going to offer him a ton of money this offseason. And to be honest, I could see a team like the San Francisco Giants maybe getting kind of wacky. We know teams like the San Diego Padres love to sniff around, but I don't know if they got the money for it right now. I think the New York Mets, too, yes, they have a high payroll right now, but this was supposed to be the year where they start shedding salary. And then next year, I think it's supposed to be the year where they try to reboot the system, and they are actually a year ahead of projection. So I wouldn't be surprised if the Mets get crazy this offseason and start throwing around the bag at some of these free agents. How about this guy? These next two guys, I think, are a little bit more questionable as to whether they're superstars. I think Corbin Burnes is definitely undeniable. These next couple guys have a little bit more, I think, built-in risk. Blake Snell. I don't know how you guys feel about Blake Snell. I do like the fact that he's kind of been around the block in the NL West, played for the Padres, played for the San Francisco Giants. I kind of like that. He started the season poorly last year. That was kind of the discussion. It was like, oh, the Scott Boras, Jordan Montgomery, Blake Snell guys, look how bad they are to start the year. He started this season bad, but then he really, really picked it up, because Blake Snell had a He had a 9.5 ERA through his first 6 starts of the season, and he still finished the season with a 3.12 ERA. Blake Snell is a strikeout machine, and when doing research for this podcast, I learned he is the all-time career leader in strikeouts per 9. He is a K machine. Do I believe in Blake Snell as much of a Corbin Burnes? Probably not. But a rotation of Gallen, Kelly, Snell, and Pfaadt would be pretty nasty. We've seen Snell pitch at a very high level on the postseason stage already. A 3.33 ERA and 48 career postseason innings is enough to get me pretty excited. 2022, he struggled, but he was pretty good in the postseason in 2019, and of course in the COVID-shortened year of 2020. But I think he has more that he wants to prove, and so I think Blake Snell could be an interesting guy. But like I always say, don't overpay 30-year-old pitchers, which Blake Snell would be. Then the last guy, who I think is pretty intriguing, who you guys might think, again, a little bit risky, but Max Fried is someone that has always intrigued me. Lefty starter. I think health has always been the question with him, because you look at his last few years. 2019, 30 starts. 2020, we'll throw that out, COVID-shortened season. But then 28 starts, 30 starts, 14 starts, and 29. And so he's been pretty healthy the last few years. 2023 was probably the biggest year that he missed in terms of time. But you look at the innings pitch for Fried, 174 innings pitched this past year. 2021, 165 innings pitched. So despite the game starts seemingly kind of high, he doesn't pitch as many innings in a given season that you might expect. 165, 185, 77, 174 is his last 4 seasons in terms of innings pitched, and I think he's nasty when he's healthy. A career 3.07 ERA. He doesn't walk a ton of guys, maybe a little bit too much, maybe a little bit more than what you would like, but still not a crazy rate. What he does really well is he just doesn't give up a ton of hard contact or contact overall. I think he's elite when he is pitching. He's just not always healthy. And also the other problem with Max Fried, the postseason stats, 67 career innings, a 5.1 ERA. And so that is not something you want to see. But I truly think Max Fried is an elite stud pitcher. And if he's your number 2, number 3 starter in this D-backs rotation, like I think that would go a long way for the D-backs. He's definitely an upgrade over the Erods and the Monties of the world. So just for needle movers for the D-backs to think about if they want to open up their purses this offseason. And now I want to discuss Ryne Nelson and his fantastic 2024 season in segment number 3. But hey, if you like doing daily fantasy sports, then I suggest Prize Picks, because Prize Picks is the best place to get real money sports action. With over 10 million members and billions of dollars in awarded winnings, Prize Picks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. You just pick more or less on at least 2 player stats for a shot to win up to 100 times your cash. Run your games all season long on Prize Picks. You can now win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks. Sign up today and get $50 instantly when you play your first $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. So just download the Prize Picks app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB to get $50 instantly when you play your first $5 lineup. That's Prize Picks. Prize Picks. Run your game. All right. Let's get back into the Locked On Diamondbacks podcast, and let's do the Ryne Nelson player review, as we're doing every day on this podcast in the offseason, picking a D-backs player and reviewing his strengths and weaknesses from 2024, then setting up some goals for 2025. And today, I want to discuss Ryne Nelson because he had himself a little bit of a breakout year. Ryne Nelson was definitely way better than anyone expected, and a 4.24 ERA is not something to sniff at all. And the funny thing with Ryne Nelson, he has been the dude that he's one of the, how do I want to say this? He has one of the highest innings pitched count totals on the D-backs the last 2 seasons. I don't know why it was so hard for me to get that phrase out, but it's not something that you'd probably expect. I'm trying to look up the exact number actually as we are discussing this, but if I had to guess, Ryne Nelson's probably like number 2 or number 3 on this D-backs team in terms of innings pitched the last 2 years, because this year, 150 innings pitched, which was second on this D-backs team. And then you go to last year, Ryne Nelson started way more games than anyone would have expected. 144 innings pitched last season. And so just looking at it off the rip, Gallen definitely has more innings pitched than Ryne Nelson. And then it's probably Ryne Nelson number 2, actually, because Merrill Kelly only made 73 innings pitched this season. And so I think over the last 2 years, Ryne Nelson is second on this D-backs team in innings pitch. And I don't know how many people would guess that or know that. When you tell people, when you think of the rotation members in this D-backs rotation the last couple of years with Gallen, Kelly, Fott, Monty, Erod, right? Slade Ciccone has had some cup of coffee. Bryce Jarvis, so many guys. Tommy Henry, right? And you say Ryne Nelson is the guy who has the second most innings pitched cumulatively over the last 2 years. Shocking. And last year, it was sad for the D-backs to say that, because he was not good last year, and we needed Ryne Nelson to have so many innings pitched because there were just not depth in the D-backs rotation for anybody else. This year, the D-backs had a lot of depth, but because of injuries and so many weird things to the D-backs rotation, Ryne Nelson had to pitch 150 innings this past season. And my God, he was really good. A 4.24 ERA, major improvement from where he was last year. Yes, the ERA was 5.31, but it's more than just the ERA. The eye test of Ryne Nelson and the second half that we saw proved to us that this is a guy ascending, getting better, and he improved on what he made mistakes on in 2023 in a big way in 2024. Starting off, he was way better against left-handed hitting. Surprisingly, he was better against lefties than righties, and as a right-handed pitcher, you might not expect that, but against the lefties this year, 243 average and a 731 OPS, which is actually slightly better than what he does against right-handed batters. That's something that you can hang your hat on if you're Ryne Nelson. The second half of the season, when the D-backs were down, Gallen, Kelly, and then Monty and Erod was never giving you a good start. Ryne Nelson stepped up to the plate for this D-backs team. 64 innings pitched in the second half to a 3.23 ERA, 1.031 whip, 9.4 strikeouts per 9. Like, really, really special, incredible stuff by Ryne Nelson in the second half of the season. What he did in clutch situations, like when runners were on, Ryne Nelson was shut down for this D-backs team. 212 average, 618 OPS with runners in scoring position. High leverage moments, 640 OPS allowed. Not something you would have expected from Ryne Nelson the year before because he was getting crushed whenever runners were on. Guys were teeing off against Ryne Nelson, but this past year, he was mowing down people when there was runners on. And you know what else? He did really good. That's a very nice thing to see. He was fantastic against the LA Dodgers. His best ERA this season came against the LA Dodgers because in 2 starts, 10 innings pitched, 1 earned run, 8 strikeouts against LA. Fantastic stuff by Ryne Nelson to step up against the team who looks like they are going to win the World Series. And we know Ryne Nelson, fastball dependent guy. The issue is for him, we've said he's been too dependent on the fastball. And last year, 2023, 308 average, 553 slugging allowed on the fastball. When you're doing that and you throw it 2/3 of the time, it's a recipe for disaster. But this season, the average dropped to 249 and the slugging dropped to 418. And because of that, he was way better as a pitcher this season because when your go-to pitch gets crushed, your numbers are going to be bad. But when your go-to pitch is effective, your numbers are going to be good. That's what happened to Ryne Nelson this past year. But what were his weaknesses from 2024? He needs to be better early in the count because Ryne Nelson on the first pitch to a batter for some reason is not very good. A very high average allowed in those situations. And also, when it comes to being down 1-0 in a count, it's also terrible. First pitch allowed, 927 OPS. And if that first pitch is a ball, the OPS for a batter rises to 1200. Ryne Nelson is a guy that has to be ahead of the count to be effective. I just want him to even that out a little bit. It shouldn't be a 0-0 count when you're already starting with the opposing batter having a 927 OPS. That is just not good to set you up in most situations. And so need him to be better early in counts. Need him to be better each time through the order because that was also a struggle of his. First time through the order, 694 OPS allowed. Third time through the order, 910 OPS allowed. And so he needs to get better. And it's hard to do because obviously the more times the batter sees you, the more confidence they're going to get, the more that they get to see your different types of pitches, the more fatigued the starter is going to be. So all that's true, but he has to get better. He can't turn into a guy who's not effective at all that third time through the lineup. And then the last thing he needs to work on, the secondary pitches still need to improve. The cutter was crushed this past season for a 508 slugging. The changeup was crushed. Oh, excuse me. The cutter gave up a 508 slugging, and then the changeup gave up a 587 slugging. So this guy still needs to work on his secondary pitches. But for Ryne Nelson, what we need to see from him next year, give us what you did in the second half for the full season. If you could do that, Ryne Nelson, the guy we saw in the second half is a legit starter, a guy that could be a number 3, number 4 starter in your rotation, and a guy that I want to make the D-backs number 5 starter next year. So give me a full second half in 2025, and we are squared away. That's it for this edition of the Locked On Diamondbacks podcast. Come back tomorrow for more Diamondbacks news coverage and insight. And as always, stay safe, stay healthy. Doses.